Sometimes advice on growing Hoyas can be repeated so often that it becomes true, even when it's not. So join me this week while we take a look at 5 pieces of bad Hoya advice. Some of what I have to say is probably going to ruffle some feathers and upset some people, but that's all part of the discussion we're going to have. So let's get underway and start with the first bad piece of Hoya advice. So I think the treat them like succulents problem comes from one of those pesky grammar issues. This is an Echinocactus grusonii, golden barrel cactus. It is a succulent, capital S, noun. This is a gasteria little warty. It is a succulent, capital S, noun. This is a Hoya carnosa, outer variegated. It is succulent, lowercase s, adjective. Lots of things can be succulent. That doesn't make them succulents. You can have a succulent steak. It doesn't make it a cactus. And neither does calling Hoyas succulents with a capital S, treating them as that noun, make them succulents. They're not the same kind of plant. They're not the same species or genus, and they really don't grow in the same parts of the world. And so they don't like the same care. So you can set the whole Hoya is a succulent thought process aside. And the next piece of bad Hoya advice is the taco test. Don't get me started. This is wrong from the get-go. I know it's funny to say, oh, I used the taco test. And I know it's popular in some places, but it's a really bad idea. Number 1, trying to fold up the leaf on your Hoya plant is a really, really good way to damage it. And we know that once Hoya leaves are damaged, they're damaged forever. And if you think I'm going to start folding up the leaves on this Hoya carnosa Wilbur Graves, you're out your mind. That's not happening. Number 2, if you have waited to water your Hoya until you can fold up the leaf, you have waited way too long. Hoya leaves aren't supposed to get like that. They ain't supposed to be like that. Number 3, what are you going to do when you get to thin-leafed Hoyas that aren't rigid, that are much more flexible? Even then, you shouldn't be trying to fold those leaves up. If you're looking for a tactile cue, you should be able to just touch the leaf. If it's not rigid, it needs a drink. And on that, so do I. Ooh. The next piece of bad Hoya advice is okay, let's start this off by being very, very clear about this. No plant wants to be pot-bound. I know your grandmother said it. I know your mother said it. I know lots of people said it. Oh, Hoyas love to be pot-bound. Let's think about this. Roots evolved to spread out to access the available moisture and nutrients in the area. If a plant, a Hoya in particular, wanted to be root-bound, its roots would naturally grow in a tiny little tight ball because that would be what was beneficial to the plant. They don't, and it isn't. So, does that mean you can't grow a Hoya in a small pot? No. If you're successful at it, and I'm sure lots of people are, it means that you have found a balance between the care you are able to provide, meaning the moisture and nutrients, and what the plant needs to grow. This Hoya erythrina desperately needs to be repotted. It's growing in a rather small pot, and I'm going to take care of that. But this plant is also able to produce a rather large foliar mass with a very small root mass. That doesn't mean it's what the plant wants. That doesn't mean it's what's going to help the plant grow to its best. So consider jettisoning the idea that your Hoyas want to be root bound. As I said at the beginning, no plant wants to be root bound. And the next bad Hoya idea is put their energy into roots. All right, first of all, there is no central planning committee in the plant, in your Hoya, that decides where it's going to put the energy. All right, a plant is a system. Each part of the plant contributes to the overall health and growth of the plant. From each according to its abilities, to each according to its needs. Yes, your Hoyas are communists. By giving it a slightly larger pot and increased access to moisture and nutrients, some people seem to believe that it's just going to grow roots and it will never put out another leaf again. And we know that's not true. What it's going to do is it's going to take those extra moisture and nutrients, share them with the rest of the plant, combine with the energy that the leaves produce, and it's going to put out more leaves. It may appear that the growth of the plant has slowed down, but that's your interpretation of it. It's not necessarily what's going on. So don't be afraid about up-potting your plant. It's not going to put all its energy into roots. What it's going to do is it's going to grow more roots, get more moisture and nutrients, and the result being it's going to put out a larger foliar mass. So the whole all its energy into roots thing, let's set that aside. The next bad Hoya idea is this is Hoya nabawanensis, and clearly it doesn't hate water. Hoyas don't hate water. If you look at the parts of the world where they grow, they get massive amounts of rain. Where I live in Rhode Island, during my dry season, I get about 3 inches of rain a month. During my wet season, I get about 4.5 inches of rain a month. Where a lot of Hoyas come from, the South Pacific, Borneo, during the wet season, they get 7 inches of rain, during the dry season, they get 7 inches of rain a month. And during the wet season, they can get upwards of 20 inches of rain a month. 20 inches, that's 5 times what I get here. And that's where Hoyas come from. So clearly they don't hate moisture. Clearly they don't hate water. What they don't like is gloppy, wet, suffocating soil. That's what causes the problem. So if you're using a heavily soil-based medium, growing mix, and it's going to hold a lot of water and essentially suffocate your roots. So don't work under the principle that Hoyas hate water. They clearly don't. They come from parts of the world that get lots of it, and they're adapted to dealing with it. So jettison that too. That's not helping you. Hoyas don't hate water. And the next piece of bad Hoya advice is no, they don't. I know, you've heard it. Hoyas like to dry out. Let your Hoyas dry out. It's not the case. If you have a Hoya like this little Hoya retusa, the last thing it wants to do with these very thin, fine leaves is to dry out. Hoyas don't really dry out in their natural environment, and it can present problems for you if you let it. If the roots dry out too much, they die. And when you water them, the roots are not there to take up and utilize any of the moisture. And that dead material starts to rot. And that rot can spread to the plant. So letting your Hoyas go absolutely desert dry, even if you just let the top inch or so go desert dry, it's not what your plant is used to. It's not what it evolved to handle. And it's not going to give you the best results. So no, Hoyas don't like to dry out. I know. There's some people saying, but my grandmother has a plant that's been growing in potting soil for 40 years. Or, I've got a massive Hoya that's growing in a tiny little glass yogurt cup. Okay, I'm glad for you. That's great. But I also hear from a lot of people, my Hoyas don't grow. My Hoyas don't do anything. They never, ever grow. And that can be due to a number of causes. The popular one now is flat mites. And I'll agree, flat mites are a pain. They're annoying. They can be fixed. But it's not the answer to everything. So start with the basics, your basic setup. If your Hoyas aren't growing, then start analyzing and looking at your basic setup. Is there something that you might be able to do differently to let your Hoyas flourish? Don't go and convert all your Hoyas to pon, or start massively watering your Hoyas, or do anything else radical because of some of the suggestions I've made. Take one Hoya and try something different with it. Or better yet, if you've got a large Hoya, take a cutting, root it, and try something different with that. Growing plants is not a set process. It's a continual experiment. What works for one Hoya is not going to work for all of them. There are going to be some general themes, like the ones I've just mentioned, but not every solution, not every suggestion is going to work for every single plant. So experiment. Try it out. I hope you enjoyed spending a little time with me on this week's end. I appreciate you watching and subscribing and taking your time and spending it with me. So join me next week for another visit and enjoy the rest of your week's end. Thank you for watching.